Good afternoon, everyone. This is Joanne Stevens. This is our Thursday call-in show, and I'm very pleased to have Frank Bowman, the Executive Director of the Illinois Manufactured Housing Association, as our guest speaker today. And Frank is going to share some ideas and information about manager compensation for the parks. This is a very important topic and something we probably don't give enough attention to. And Frank recently led a forum at the George Allen Roundtable in Indianapolis, where he was able to get information from a wide range of owners, from small parks to large portfolio owners. So this is an important session today. So before I introduce Frank, I want to remind our listeners that this call will be taped and will be on our YouTube channel sometime after the call. Also, the newsletters that I do are on our website, and that is joannemstevens.com. So you may access all of the newsletters. Also want to remind our listeners, if you're a park owner and you'd like a complimentary market analysis of your property, we call it a real estate review. There's no charge, it's confidential, and I'll be happy to do it for you. Also want to remind our listeners of upcoming events, and you can access the events and the registration for the events by going to my website, joannemstevens.com, and in the upper right-hand corner, click Save the Date, and you'll see the links to the upcoming events that you may want to participate in. So the ones coming up in October and November are the New York event, New York Housing Alliance, which is October 5th and 6th. I will be speaking at the New York Housing Association. Also, another important one is SECO, S-E-C-O, October 10th, 11th, and 12th in Marietta, Georgia, and they're having a tremendous number of speakers at that event. And I've heard many good things about the SECO convention. Also, another not-to-be-missed event is the National Communities Council meeting in Chicago at the Westin Hotel, which is right off of Michigan Avenue, November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And if you want to know more about that event, in last week's call, Jenny Hodge, who is a vice president at the Manufactured Housing Institute, spoke about the speakers and all of the sessions. So that is an important meeting coming up in November, and you can link to the registration if you wish right from the website. Or there will be phone numbers you can call to get more information. So that's all the announcements for today. So I wanted to introduce Frank Bowman. And Frank, are you with us?
Hi, Joanne. Yes, I'm here.
I've known Frank for several years. He's the executive director for the Illinois Manufactured Housing Association, and he is doing a phenomenal job for the Illinois Association and is well respected throughout the industry as an up-and-coming executive director. And so Frank, welcome. And I know, tell us a little bit about how at the George Allen Roundtable, how did your session come about? In other words, why were you asked to have the managers' compensation session?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on today, Joanne. I appreciate the opportunity. George and I've talked over I get a lot of calls into the association from a variety of industry participants, and a lot of them are community owners that are entering second or third generation roles within their communities, or expanding their operations, and they're asking questions about compensation. So it's kind of grown out of the questions that I've received here at the association regarding that topic. And so George said, that's probably something that we ought to do at the round table, because other folks probably have that question, and he thought he could learn from it too. So we did it. We did a session there, and it was, I think, rather well received, and was happy to have the opportunity to do so.
And so your session, Frank, was it? Were there managers or owners who participated and shared their information of what they were doing in their communities?
Well, yes, we patterned it as an open discussion where I would, after doing some brief introductions, ask certain questions about ways that people do things maybe within their communities or within their business organizations, and so that's exactly what we had happen. And we had folks, small community owners through mid-sized portfolio owners in the room, who were sharing some of their experiences and some of their business secrets, even in some cases, on how they address manager compensation, and it's quite enlightening.
I bet it was quite enlightening. I'm sorry I missed that session. And so, were there any? Well, let's start with. I want to talk to you about some. Did you talk about compensation? Was there any discussion about what people are paying managers, or any changes or trends that you learned?
Well, sure. The biggest thing is there's more than one way to calculate compensation, and it really depends on what your needs are. So, and while no hard dollars were exchanged, that kind of information, but it was pretty much agreed that the amount of salaries, either with or without it, various sorts of incentive pay, can run from minimal to some folks paying way more than they think is necessary. But some of the key factors there are property size and its income producing capability. They all relate to that issue. So it's kind of, there's no one size fits all answer, Joanne. And but and it keys into duties that are being asked, what your agreement is with your managers, whether they're employees or even independent contractors can factor in. Just a whole bunch of things that need to be considered.
Yes, I think you just touched on something important, Frank, and that is the idea of an employee versus an independent contractor. And there does seem to be, in my experience of listing and selling parks and looking at a lot of properties and looking at a lot of, talking to a lot of owners, that there's still quite a few owners who consider the job of the manager to be an independent contractor. Did you get a sense of that one way or the other? Is it trending for more park owners to make their managers employees rather than independent contractors?
As you know, with the broad consolidation that's taking place across the country, it becomes harder to manage a network of independent contractors after a while, and it depends what your needs are and what your agreements are. The IRS has some pretty solid rules on what constitutes an employee and what constitutes an independent contractor, and you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you're not following it correctly. Independent contractors require written agreements and the ability to work without direct oversight there's a lot of obligations on both sides. So I'm thinking I'm seeing more folks who are looking towards employees rather than independent contractors, unless that independent contractor happens to be a third party professional property manager.
Sure.
Which some
yes, I would echo the same thing, Frank, that I'm seeing more of a trend towards owners, especially newer owners who are getting into the mobile home park business, that they feel quite strongly that managers need to be employees, just for the simple reason they don't want to get sideways with either the IRS or the state workplace, whatever it's called in that particular state. They want to have good relations with those agencies. So I would say that's something that's a bit new for our industry.
And whether a person, they can become an employee as soon as you ask them to help. Whether you actually draw up formal employee agreements, or you may not even be aware that they're your employee, but that kind of thing transpires all the time. So if you've got a resident that you're using, as your eyes and ears in a community, you really need to take a good look at what that person's doing for you, and whether or not that needs to be under some sort of a more formal agreement.
And Frank, one of the things you just mentioned was about benefits. Was there did you hear people talking about what kind of benefits they're giving their managers?
Well, benefits, not so much in the way of health and retirement type of benefits, but there some folks, they do an awful lot of incentivizing for their managers, whether it's through occupancy levels or collected rents, or site inspections. They pass site inspections, and and really one of the most interesting things that came out is you don't just incentivize just your managers. You have to have the entire team involved in that program, including maintenance folks and others who may be on the property, in other capacities. So it's a lot of some of the community owners are practicing team building through their incentive programs, and I found that interesting.
That is interesting, and just the whole idea of team building, it sounds very proactive. In other words, I think there was a time in this business, this goes back probably at least 10 years or longer ago, mostly before the landscape started to change with the financing for the homes, where there's just more to do. And so you do need to build a team to keep people energized with the management. And so that was a trend that you heard about, was team building.
Right, and it helps them get the results that they want in their communities. Which is what the team is all about. And so between that and the ways that people are compensated, some of the comments that came were, we pay them to get a job done, and some days it might take 2 hours, some days it might take 20. You just don't know. Well, one of the things that we failed to discuss there, but should probably, is that under the Department of Labor, there was a new overtime rule that came into effect in December of 2016, which raised the rate of salaried employees, and when overtime kicks in, when they're full time, and a full time employee is only 30 hours a week or 130 hours a month on average, as defined by the IRS. So it's something that that folks need to be aware of. But if you've got a salaried employee that's working, and how many hours they're working, and what that level of pay is, Joanne.
And does that, maybe you don't know the answer to this, but when you say 30 hours a week is full time, does that mean an average over a month or a year? Or in other words, if somebody runs over 130 hours in 1 month, but is only 100 hours the next month, does it even out? Or
well, no, the rule states that it's up to the discretion of the employer. It can be averaged anywhere from 3 months to 12 months at your discretion.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I think there's a lot of confusion about that. I didn't mean to put you on the spot about that, but I think that's an important rule that we need to keep top of mind with these managers or anybody who's employed by the property.
And it is something that's new as of again, December 2016, that most folks may not have run across yet, even though we've tried to get the news out. But we find a lot of times it doesn't reach the ears it needs to get to.
And so, Frank, getting back to something you said about the compensation, and it sort of depends, and there's different. Sounds like people are said that there was different compensation, and for the managers reaching certain goals, you're incentivizing them to do certain things. Did anybody talk about what those things, incentives were, or for what duties?
Well, other than like we talked about, basically, is keeping occupancies at a certain level, or passing certain site inspection goals. When a regional manager or the owner might come through and do a site inspection, and they may have other types of performance bonuses to accomplish whatever the goals are for that particular community. And so that seemed to be something that was kind of trending in the audience.
Yes, one of the things that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just say the audience in Indianapolis there at the round table.
One of the rules of thumb that I heard, I'll just interject this, and a lot of times when I'm doing a market evaluation for a park owner, and they don't have any compensation in there for a manager because they're either managing it themselves or they're having somebody do it that maybe lives in the park, that they charge so little for, that they're paid so little, that I feel that's not real reasonable to think that if the park sells, the current whoever is doing the management or helping out is not going to. We need to put in a figure that's realistic. And so one of the ideas that I've heard, and this is from Frank Rawl, from the that does the boot camps for people getting into the mobile home park business, is he says to charge $15 to $20 per space. And I've even used the number of $25 just as a kind of rule of thumb. It kind of depends, as you were saying, there's no hard and fast rule, but depending on what needs to be done, if it's a makeover, it's probably going to be at the higher end, the $20 to $25 range. If the park is full and the homes are in good condition, the yards are pretty cleaned up, maybe that's in the $15 to $20 per site. And then what I've seen people, the thing I'm seeing change is that the managers are doing more showing of the homes and getting the homes, making sure the homes are ready to show. Was there any discussion about managers leasing the homes or selling the homes?
Well, yes, we certainly talked about that. You know, because most folks, most community owners are now expecting the manager to not only handle new home sales but also installation. And again, that's one of the biggest questions I get here at the association is about installation requirements. But you know, we have to recognize that most of the time, community managers are neither sales nor construction experts, and yet we're asking them to hire and supervise subcontractors, fill out required paperwork. You know, we're putting an awful lot of burden on these folks who may not have that type of necessary experience. You know, you had asked about training, I think, at some point, and that's one of the aspects that we probably ought to get into. But
Sure.
there was, yeah, I think that's pretty common. You know, that we've seen the new retail, if you will, where community managers are putting in homes on spec or for rental purposes, and it really adds another duty for that manager.
Yes, I think the days are long gone, and most owners who have owned their parks for a long time, 15, 20 years, 30 years. I mean, we have people in this business that have owned their parks for 30 and 40 years or even longer than that, or they're in a family where they're second or third generation. And it took them a long time, and some of them still have not adjusted to the fact that there are very few retailers left. It used to be that the park owners and managers didn't have anything to do with selling the homes. In fact, honestly, it seemed to me that they looked down their noses at the retailers like, oh, we don't want anything to do with having to sell these homes and deal with, you know, convincing a prospective resident to buy a home. And now, of course, if the mobile home park owners are the retailers, which means the managers are the retailers. So for sure, we do expect a lot more out of these managers when it comes to the homes. So was there any discussion about training, or in your experience, what are you seeing park owners do for training their managers for this new level of duties?
Some of them, you know, we've actually put on sales seminars at our annual meeting for the Illinois Association, and you know, I've been to other topics on sales at other functions. So you know, that type of a network or coming to the association events can provide some of that training. Of course, there are trainers for hire. You know, if you've got a larger organization, but you know, the best practices for training the employees really depends on the specific situation that you have and the level of maturity of your organization. You know, most small companies, there's no formal manager training systems. You know, if people do well, they get promoted. And so, you know, small companies, they really can't afford to have somebody inside to do the training, or often, as we found, can't or don't send all of their managers to external training. So, but you know, in today's regulatory environment, Joanne, there's really no way of escaping the need for everybody to develop a more formal approach, you know, to training their managers.
Well, that is very well said. I think it's becoming, as each year passes, it's becoming, I would say, more of a minefield in the sense that it's getting easier and easier to make a misstep and get into a lot of trouble. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. You know, with all the regulations, not only from the financial end of making a sale and the responsibilities that HUD is placed on the industry for installations, but you know, you've got things like the Fair Housing Act that you need to constantly train on. You know, regularly and often, you need to do that kind of training and put documentation that the employees had participated in that training in their personnel files, because a manager or a maintenance person can get you in a lot of trouble with what they say, even when you're not around. So fair housing is something that we can't impress enough upon people to spend more time doing. But
that's
then
an
you got
excellent point, Frank.
sure, and you've got
ahead.
you've got when you have an employee, Joanne, as you know, as soon as you have one or more employees, you got to develop employee handbooks and company policies, and you need to do training on whatever your corporate procedures are too, or your community rules. Just again, regularly and often, training needs to take place.
Yeah, and Frank, one thing I wanted to ask you too. It seems like about every business publication or business news channel talks about how unemployment is low in the country. And do you think that's making it harder to find and hire and retain managers? Or did you get a sense of that?
Well, I think it is, Joanne. We all know that the government's played with the numbers for so long, and there's so much of the potential labor force to just quit seeking work. So the numbers seem low, but there's people out there. But finding somebody with the right personality that fits your community, or just the right mix of industry knowledge, and more importantly, a willingness to work. It's no easy task. So, how do you do that? Well, maybe talking with other investors or community owners, or members of your association. Networking at industry events is always a good one. And there's a lot of talent out there in places like LinkedIn now, Joanne. That if you're looking for somebody, maybe they're there.
That's an excellent idea. I know that in the past I've heard years ago people, and maybe this still works, where somebody who bought a park, the new owner would drive through the park and look for the nicest appearing home in the park, and get out of the car and go knock on that person's door and ask them to be the manager, because they figured that if they had such a nice looking home, they probably would be a good manager. And I don't know if that I think that worked for some people, but it probably had to do with how good of a trainer that park owner was. The other thing park owner told me one time is that he put out a letter to, after he took ownership of a park, to say that he was looking for a new manager, and turns out that about everybody in the park thought that they were management material, especially the people who were behind in their rent, thought they would be excellent managers.
Sure.
So, but we are, I think what you had said about the, keeping the team building aspect going. And if I may, I'd like to insert something that I've been learning recently, and this is on my YouTube channel also. I'll preface it by saying it's the New York event next month that I'm speaking at. The talk is about the perspective of if Warren Buffett owned a mobile home park, which he would never do that, because he's for all of his investments, he doesn't invest in real estate. He owns many companies and are big chunks of companies, and so he knows he calls them his managers are really the CEOs of the company. But his criteria, and this is important when he's buying a company, it's not just the price of the company and how much money they earn. It's also who is the manager, because he wants long-term managers. And he says in his shareholder letters that his managers are very trustworthy, very energetic, and that they love the business. And I can tell you, I do come across managers at parks who they truly do have an enthusiasm for the residents that live there, for mobile home park living, for keeping the property looking very clean and as good as it can look, even if it's an old park. And so I think if that standard is good enough for Warren Buffett, it ought to be good enough for us.
Well, and that plays directly with your example of the person with the nicest home on the block. You know, they take pride in their community, and that shows through. So, you know, it's the same in any type of a community or organization. Yeah, you need to have somebody that in charge that believes in the mission and the goal and the cause. So, I think that makes good sense.
And I think a trend that we're seeing too, and I doubt that this came up in your meeting, but please chime in if it did, is that properties where, parks and communities where there's either a long-term manager, an employee that has been there for many years, or a family member that has been there for many years, and the park owner is beside themselves as to what do you do when you have somebody who's been there a long time and just isn't cutting it? And I'll give you an example, and then I'd like to you to speak from your experience, Frank. And I'm just had a transaction a few years ago where a family member was very highly paid, and when I use that example, $15 to $25 a site as a fair compensation, depending on what needs to be done. This particular relative was being paid over twice that amount, so over $50 per site, and the occupancy was dropping, and the income was dropping. People were behind in their rent by many months. The property was starting to look, every year that passed a little more shabby. And so that owner, just couldn't, still to this day, as far as I know, hasn't addressed that situation with the family member. Another example is an owner told me not too long ago that his manager said, well, he wanted to keep being the manager and running the park as long as he didn't have anything to do with the tenants or collecting the rent. And so that, I don't know what accommodation they have worked out, but that to me sounds like a manager who just has lost his enthusiasm for the mobile home park business.
Right, and so much of that is actually, being community relations as much is a big part of the job, and you do see that a lot of managers now, they're responsible for their own social media outlets and things like Facebook and such, and some community owners are even tasked them with creating other, putting together other creative marketing to try to fill those sites. And so, you see community-based newsletters, you see, to build that sense of community. A lot of the managers are stepping up to that role as well, Joanne. So, the second, third generation, they may not even be on the site. They may be just kind of I hate to use the term allowance, but in some cases that may be what it is, for the family member. And it's hard to tell your family member sometimes that you need them to change. So
yeah, it's I'm finding for many owners it's about impossible, unless you don't expect to ever be able to sit down at the Thanksgiving dinner table together, which most owners just that's not a very appealing proposition.
Yeah. Right.
I think I'm wondering if the day is coming when, just like we rate hotels, people go online to rate the hotels, they go online to rate the restaurants. things like that. Is the day coming when consumers are going to be able to go online and rate the mobile home parks and the management and the ownership and the appearance?
Oh, I suspect it's already here, Joanne. I haven't tapped into that type of a network, but I imagine you could probably get on some of the review sites, Yelp, or some of the ones that are out there, and probably find reviews posted on your communities. So I think we're already there.
I'm sure we are already there, and I'm sure that that our prospective residents are reading those reports. It probably would be best if we, as owners and managers, went online to see how we were being rated as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
we're getting towards.
That's a good point, Joanne. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's a good point. That's with any other business, whether it's retail or communities. You're out there in front of the public online these days, so you need to check your online presence regularly.
So that's a new develop. Well, I shouldn't say new. It's not that new, but for many owners, I think that is still a rather new development. Their online presence. And so I want to thank Frank Bowman of the Illinois Manufactured Housing Association for leading this discussion today about manager compensation. It's probably one of the sort of secretive things in the business. Nobody really wants to say what they're paying their managers, but hopefully our listeners have gotten some ideas on how to think about their managers, and particularly about the written description and the laws about the hours and the full-time managers. So thank you, Frank. And how can people reach if they want to ask you any questions about your panel at the George Allen Roundtable?
Well, Joanne, I'd be happy to answer your questions, but if you have specific questions, I'm not an attorney, and today this wasn't legal advice, but I would strongly encourage you to consult with payroll specialists or human resource professionals, or maybe even your own attorney, for your specific business. But I'd be happy to answer questions. Everything about the Illinois Manufactured Housing Association is available or linked through our website, which is IMHA.org.
Well, great. That's a great resource. Well, thank you again, Frank, and I hope our listeners join us next week when our guest will be Tim DeWitt. He's the former executive director for the Michigan Housing Association, and he's going to speak to us about the benefits of belonging to your state manufactured housing association. So thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.